Feeding the Flame by Tuesday Love Sang Rampa. Chapter 8. If you don't scale the mountain, you can't view the plain. The old man, resting in his bed, was looking out across the city, looking out at some new building being built, and at a very large hotel, the leading hotel in the whole city. Miss Cleo and Miss Taddy were busy sleeping. They had had a disturbed night because the old man had been very unwell, and of course it definitely takes two Siamese cats to manage things when the old man is particularly unwell. So they were catching up on their sleep, moving about in their sleep as all the best people do, twitching a bit, but happy to be close to each other. The old man thought of them with absolute love, thought of them as he would have thought of his own children, for these were very high entities in animal form, little people who had come to do a job and who were doing that job magnificently. In their 4 short years of life, they had had quite a bit of moving about, quite a bit of travel, and quite a bit of hardship. Hardship largely brought on by the incessant press persecution. The old man lay there in the gloaming, thinking about it all, thinking of conditions at Montreal, and how they had left before their tenancy had ended. They had made arrangements for accommodation in the city of St. John, but when it was too late to change anything, the person still in the apartment found he was unable to leave. So the family had no alternative to staying expensively in a hotel. The Admiral Beatty Hotel was truly as much of a home from home as any hotel could be. It was, and it is, a happy hotel where everyone is satisfied with the general manager, a man with years and years of experience, a man who knows all the problems and, better still, knows the answers to them. In the hotel, one of the bellboys, Brian, was always most helpful and most courteous, and being a cat lover, he really fell for Miss Cleo and Miss Taddy, and that pair, being flirts like most girls, really played up to him, purred for him, rubbed against him, and, like most girls, made him think that he was the only one. Mrs. Catherine Mays. The old man had a lot of difficulty with diet, and the menu of a hotel is not designed for those who are sick and limited to certain foods. Mrs. Catherine Mays went out of her way at all times to make sure that everything was as good as could be. Now that the family were in an apartment, they still welcomed Mrs. Mays as a visitor. But the lights in the harbor were becoming more and more numerous. Ships were coming in, ready to discharge their cargoes as the next working day. 2 Russian ships, another one from Liberia, one from India, and one from Cyprus, all moored up along the wharves, all laden down, well down to their Plimsoll line, and a gently swaying at the changing of the tide. The pilot boat was just coming away from a newcomer, its red signal lamp blinking and bobbing. Soon it turned right and went into its slipway, so the pilots could wait for the next ship. Down at the level crossing, the infernal trains hooted and blared away, making such a commotion as would get any other person clapped straight into prison for disturbing the peace. Yet these unmentionable railway workers seemed to think it was their prerogative and sacred duty to wreck the hearing of a whole city. The old man wondered why the city council didn't get off their behinds and pass that long protected law prohibiting the blaring of sirens from trains passing through the city. But the old man thought it's useless to do idle gazing when a book has to be written, so he thought he would have to do what the city council should do. He thought he would have to get off his behind and get to work. Going through all the questions, one of the most amazing things is the number of people who write, "Tell us about life after death and about dying." I'm almost ashamed to return to that subject which I have dealt with so many times. I'm almost ashamed to tell Rab that I am writing about death again, and I'm almost frightened to think of Buttercup's stony glare when she tells me that I'm repeating myself. But then Miss Newman, or perhaps it is Mrs. Newman, asks about life after death, and another letter here wants a complete but understandable knowledge of the so-called after-death state. Riffling through these questions, I find more and more people asking about life after death. Well, I seem to be ruled out. It seems that I shall have to write about life after death, and if you don't want to read it, go through these pages with your eyes shut until you come to a part you do like. Let us consider what happens at the onset of death. Usually a person is ill, and as a result of that illness, some part of the body, essential to the continuance of life on earth, is losing its ability to function properly. It may be the heart, so let us pretend that it is a heart case which we are discussing. So in our heart case, we can say that the heart muscle has turned into a fibroid mass. It can no longer pump blood in adequate quantities through the brain, and so the faculties become dull. As the faculties become dull, the will to live diminishes, and there is less stimulation for the heart to continue its labored pumping. There comes a time when the heart can no longer continue. Before that stage is reached, the person is in a state where he doesn't have the energy to feel pain. He is half in this world and half in the next. He is in the state of a baby who's half out of the world, which is his mother, and half in the world, which we call earth. On the other side of death, helpers are ready. As soon as the heart ceases, there's a jerk. No, it's not a jerk of pain. There is no death agony. That's quite stupid fiction. The so-called death agony is merely a reflex action of nerves and muscles which, freed from the control of the driver of the body, just twitch and twist and jerk, well, as the name implies, uncontrollably. Many people think that it is an agony, but of course it is not, because the occupant of the body has left. And should there be grimaces of the face, that's merely the twitching of the muscles. The body, bereft of its occupant, may twitch or utter gasps for a short time. There may be the rumbling of organs within the body, but all that is just like an old suit of clothes settling down after they've been thrown on a chair or on a bed. There's nothing to it. The body is now just garbage, ready to be buried or burnt. Doesn't matter which, really. The newest occupant or inhabitant of the astral world, the former driver of the body, will be met by helpers ready to do anything they can to assist in the process of acclimatization. It sometimes happens, unfortunately, that a truly ignorant person will not believe in life after death. So what then? If a person definitely refuses to believe in the life after death, he or she is in a state of complete hypnosis, auto-hypnosis, and even on Earth there are many cases of people being blind just because they think they are. There are many cases of people who are deaf only because they have wished themselves deaf, perhaps to escape the noise of a nagging wife, and such cases are attested by the medical profession. If a person will not believe in anything after death, then that person is enveloped in a thick, black, sticky fog, and helpers cannot help him. They can't reach him because he won't let them. He repulses everything they want to do for him because he's so convinced that there's no such thing as an afterlife that he believes he is having unpleasant nightmares. In the course of time, the person begins to realize that there must be something in this life after death business after all. Why does he hear voices? Why does he sense some people near him? Why does he hear, perhaps, music? With dawning awareness that there might just possibly be something after death, the thick black fog lightens and becomes gray. Light can filter in. He can see dim figures moving about, and he can hear more clearly. So, gradually, as his prejudices and inhibitions break down, he becomes more and more aware that something is happening around him. People constantly trying to help him, they try to tell him that they want to help. They invite him to accept that help, and as soon as he does feel that he will accept help, then that fog disperses, and he can see all the glory of the astral world. Colors such as Earth lacks, brightness and lightness, and very, very pleasant surroundings. Our poor friend, who is only just beginning to realize that there is life after death, is taken to what we might call a hospital or rest home or recuperation center. There, by various rays, his mental inhibitions are further dispersed. His spirit body is strengthened and made healthy, and it is also nourished. Things are explained to him. He is in much the same position as a newborn baby, except that he can understand all that is said to him, and he can reply, whereas a baby has to learn even to speak. So the person hears an explanation of what life on the other side is like. If he wants to argue about it, he just cannot. People will not argue with him. He's just left to think about what he's been told. And when he can freely accept that which he has been told, the explanation continues. He is never persuaded of anything. He's never forced to do anything. He has a right of choice. If he doesn't want to believe, then he has to stay in a somewhat static condition until he will believe. Many there are who pass beyond the earth to the next life with the firm, absolutely unbreakable conviction that their own particular religion is the only one which can exist. These poor wretches are in much the same position, because the helpers on the other side know quite well that they cannot help the newcomer if their mere appearance shatters a lifelong belief. So let us suppose a person is a very strong Catholic, believing in angels and devils and all the rest of that pantomime. Then, when they get to the other side, they do indeed see the pearly gates. They see an old fellow with a beard and a whacking great ledger in which they think all the sins are being recorded. Everything is done to put on the sort of show that the good, ignorant Catholic wants to see. He sees angels with flapping wings, he sees people sitting on clouds playing harps, and for a time he's quite satisfied, thinking he's reached heaven. But gradually it dawns on him that all this doesn't ring true. The people do not fly in the right rhythm for beating wings, etc., etc. Gradually it dawns on the newcomer that all of this is a stage show, and he begins to wonder what's behind it all. What is behind the drapes and the set piece? What are things really like? And just as soon as he begins to think that way, he begins to see cracks in the facade of the heavenly crowd. Soon there comes a time when he cannot stick the pantomime any longer, and he cries out for enlightenment. Quickly the angels with their flapping wings fade away. Quickly the harpists sitting in their nightshirts on a cloud beat it. Quickly highly trained, highly experienced helpers show the newly awakened newcomer the reality instead of the illusion. And the reality is far greater than the illusion could ever be. It's a sad fact that so many people see a few pictures in the Bible and take them for gospel. Well, book illustrators are employed to illustrate the Bible as well, remember? No matter what religion it is, if there are adherents who believe unswervingly in the legends and, let us say, fantasies of that religion, then that is what they see when they leave the earth and enter the astral plane. When the newcomer can realize the nature of the world he's in, then he can proceed further. He goes to the Hall of Memories, and there, alone, he enters a room, and he sees the whole of his life, everything he's done, everything he tried to do, and everything he wanted to do. He sees everything that happened to him, and everything that he thought while upon the earth, and he alone can make a judgment of whether his life was a success or a failure. He alone can decide whether he will go back to college and start the course all over again in the hope of passing successfully next time. There is no mother or father or best friend to stand by and take the blame for anything that he has done wrongly. He's there alone, entirely alone, more alone than he's been since he stood in that place before, last time. And he judges himself. No devils, no Satan, waiting with twitching tail and fiery breath. Nobody's going to jab pitchforks into him. And as for all the flames, well, they don't even use such things for central heating. Most people emerge from the Hall of Memories considerably shaken and remarkably glad of the help and sympathy which their helpers, waiting outside, offer. There comes a period of adjustment, a period when the newcomer can think over all that he's seen, think over all the mistakes he's made, think over what he's going to do about it. It's not a matter to be decided in a few minutes. All manner of things have to be considered. Is it worth going back and starting all over again? Or would it be better to stay a few hundred years in the astral, waiting perhaps for more suitable conditions to come along? But then, thinks the newcomer, he doesn't know about all the suitable conditions or when they're likely to come along. So he is invited to go to helpers who will discuss everything with him, and who will advise him without putting any pressure whatever on him. At all times he has complete freedom of choice, freedom of decision. No one is going to force him to do anything. If he wants to go back and do a bit of hell-raking on earth, that's his choice, and his choice only. Many newcomers are not aware that they can pick up all the sustenance, all the nourishment they need from the air, from the vibrations around them. They think of their earthly life, they think of all the choice foods they would have liked to have had but perhaps couldn't afford, so if they want it, they can have it. No matter what type of food, it is there for the asking. If they want fat cigars or thin cigarettes or smoking pipes, yes, they can have those as well. And clothes? You'll never see such a medley of clothes and costumes as you will on the astral plane. Anyone can wear any style of clothes he desires, and it's not considered at all wrong. No one cares. It's the other person's affair. So if a fellow wants to get himself done up as a hippie with a load of pot on each hand, he can do so. The pot won't hurt him. It only hurts when he's on the earth, because astral pot is entirely harmless. Earth pot is horrifically dangerous. But the newcomer soon tires of doing nothing. He soon tires of just kicking his heels and watching the astral world go by. Even if he was a lazy slob on earth, one who just liked to hang around street corners and utter wolf whistles, well, even that sort of fellow soon tires of doing nothing in the atmosphere of the astral plane. He asks for work, and he gets it. What sort of work? Well, there are all manner of things to be done. It's impossible to say what sort of work he does, just as it's impossible to say what sort of work a person would get here on earth if they went to Timbuktu or Alsace-Lorraine suddenly. They do work within their capabilities, necessary work, and in doing the work they find considerable satisfaction and stability. But all the time they have the nagging thought, the nagging wonder of what to do. Should they stay in the astral a bit longer? What would other people do? They ask again and again, and they're told again and again. Always the same thing, they are told, and never is there any attempt to persuade them to do anything. The choice is entirely theirs. At last, they decide they can't hang around any longer. They decide they cannot be a dropout from the school of earth. They must go back, do their lessons properly, and pass the examinations. They make their decision known, and then they're taken to a special group of people who have vast experience and some very, very remarkable instruments. It is determined what the person has to learn. It is determined how best he may learn it. Go to a poor family, will that help? Or should he go to a rich family? Should he be a white man or a colored man? Should he be a woman, colored or white? It depends on the sort of mess he made of his last life. It depends on how hard he is prepared to work in the coming life. It depends on what he has to learn. Anyhow, the advisors are well qualified to help him. They can suggest, and they suggest only, the type of parents, the type of country, and the conditions. Then, when he has agreed to the conditions, certain instruments are brought into play and the necessary parents to be are located. Alternative parents are located as well, and these parents are observed for a short time. Then, if everything proves satisfactory, the person who is ready to reincarnate goes to a special home in the astral world. There he goes to bed, and when he wakes up, he's in the process of being born into the earth. No wonder he makes such a commotion and lets out wails of despair. Many people, entities, decide they do not want to return to Earth just yet, and so they stay in the astral worlds where they have much work to do. But before discussing them, let us deal with the special class of people who have no choice, and these are suicides. If a person has willfully ended his or her life on earth before the allotted number of years, then that person has to return to earth as fast as possible in order to serve out the unexpired time, just as if they were a convict who had escaped and had been recaptured and had had a bit of time tacked on as an extra punishment. A suicide gets into the astral world. He's met, received, just as if he were an ordinary, legitimate person coming back. No recriminations, nothing of that type at all. He's treated precisely the same as other entrants. He's allowed a reasonable time in which to recover from the shock of leaving the physical body, probably violently, and entering the astral. When he has recovered sufficiently, he has to go to the Hall of Memories, and there he sees all that has ever happened to him. He sees the flaws which really made him commit suicide. And so he is left with the awful feeling, the awful knowledge would be a better term, that he has to get back to Earth and live out the unexpired term. Possibly the suicide is a person of poor spiritual caliber. Possibly he lacks the intestinal fortitude to go back on Earth, and he thinks he is just jolly well going to stay in the astral, and nobody can do anything about it. Well, he's wrong there, because it is a law that a suicide has to return to Earth, and if he will not return on his own free will, then he is compelled to go. If he is willing to return, then at a meeting with special counselors he is advised of how many days or years there are remaining to him on his earth sentence. He has to live out all the time on earth. He also has to live out all the time that has elapsed since he committed suicide and before returning to earth again. So perhaps it took a year to straighten him out and get him to decide that he had to go back to earth. Thus he gets a year added to his life on earth. Conditions are found on Earth so that he can return and encounter substantially the same type of conditions which caused him to take his life before. And then, at the appointed time, he's put to sleep and awakens to the act of being born. If he proves recalcitrant and just will make no move to go back to Earth, then the counselors decide for him on conditions that would meet his case. If he will not go freely, then the conditions are a bit tougher than if he did go freely. Then again, at the appointed time, he's put to sleep without him having any choice whatever in the matter. He's put to sleep, and when he wakes up, he's back on Earth. It is often the case that a baby who is born and dies perhaps a month or two after is the reincarnation of a person who committed suicide rather than face perhaps 2 or 3 months of agony when they were dying from incurable, inoperable cancer. The sufferer may have taken his own life 2 or 3 or perhaps 6 months or a year before he would have died naturally, but he still has to come back and serve out all the time which he tried to short-circuit. It is sometimes thought that pain is a useless thing. Suffering is a useless thing. It is sometimes thought that it is good to kill off a human who is incurable. But do these people who advocate such a course really know what the sufferer is trying to learn? His very suffering, the very nature of his illness, may be something about which he desired to learn. People often write to me and say, "Oh, Dr. Rampa, with all your knowledge, how is it that you have to suffer so? Why don't you cure yourself and live forever?" But of course that's nonsense. Who wants to live forever? And people who write in with statements like that, how do they know what I'm trying to do? They don't, and that's all there is to it. If a person is investigating a certain subject, then often that person has to undergo a considerable amount of hardship in order to do the work properly. These people who wander off and bring aid and sustenance to lepers, for instance, well, they don't know how the leper feels or how the leper thinks. They might be helping the leper's physical being, but they still are not lepers. It's the same with TB or cancer or even an ingrown toenail. Until one actually has the complaint or the condition, then one quite definitely is not qualified to make any discussion on the complaint or condition. It always amuses me that Roman Catholic priests who are not married and who, presumably, never have children, never become a father, that is, except in the spiritual sense, dare to advise women about having children and all of that. Of course, many of these Catholic priests go away for vacations, and they get to know quite a lot about women. We saw that in Montreal. It is definitely wrong, then, to commit suicide. You are just postponing the day when you can be free of Earth legitimately. You've got to come back like an escaped convict who has been recaptured, and you are hurting no one but yourself. And it's yourself you think about, isn't it? That's one of the things that has to be overcome too. The ordinary average person who is not too good and not too bad stays in the astral world for a varying period of time. It is not true that everyone stays there for 600 or 1,000 or 2,000 years. It depends entirely on the conditions which prevail in the case of each and every individual. Here is an average time, but then there is an average man in the street and an average woman in the street, and an average time is just, well, it's just a figure. There are many tasks to do in the astral world. Some people help those who are coming to join the astral world. Some people act as guides to them, and this guide has nothing to do with spiritualist seances or old ladies who think they have a red Indian guide or a Chinese Mandarin guide or a Tibetan Lama guide. What these old ladies usually have is an overdose of imagination. Actually, if everything was counted up, and if everyone who claimed to have an Indian guide or a Tibetan guide was listed, there just wouldn't be enough Indians or enough Tibetans to go around. And in any case, these people on the other side have teacups, so some old biddy can give a reading. It doesn't include speaking through a tin trumpet or moving a bit of cheesecloth. All that stuff, which of course is utterly useless, comes from a bit of nervous energy on the part of some, usually hysterical, operator. People on the other side have too much to do looking after their own affairs to come to earth and poke about in dark rooms breathing down the necks of people who are there for a delicious thrill. The only ones who do go to these seances from the other side are the nature spirits of a lower type called elementals. They are there just for some fun, to see what a lot of saps these humans are, to believe anything and everything that is told to them. Don't you, my dear friends, reader, go in for this stuff, because this stuff is bogus. The same goes for this Ouija board stuff. People will get a Ouija board and play about with it, and some elemental who is always dashing about like a mischievous monkey will see what is being done, and he will definitely influence the reading. Now you might think there's no harm in that, but there's no good in it either. And definitely there is great harm in these Ouija board readings if an elemental causes the message to be given to sound highly plausible, but which is just something extracted from the victim's own subconscious. A person's whole life can be affected for the worse by believing in this Ouija board messages. Another great source of misinformation is when the Ouija board is moved in accordance with the collective thought of the people who are gathered round. Often it will be impelled by wishful thinking, and again will give a message which can be positively harmful by being misleading. The safest thing is, have nothing whatever to do with Ouija boards, and nothing whatever to do with seances. Remember, you came to this earth deliberately not knowing the exact purpose of your visit, and if you try to find out too much without very, very exceptional cause, then you are like the student going to the examination room who manages to steal a copy of the examination papers first. That is just plain cheating, and it doesn't help at all. One job which has to be done in the astral world is to receive those who come during the hours of sleep. People are arriving at all times because when it is daylight in one part of the world, it's night in another part. So there are a constant stream of people going to the astral world during their sleep period, and they are just like children returning from school. Just as children like to be greeted by their parents or friends, so do these night travelers. Their traffic has to be directed. They have to be put in touch with those whom they desire to meet, and many of them desire information and counseling during what, upon earth, is night. They want to know how they're doing and what they should do on the morrow. This does occupy a lot of time for a lot of people. Then there are other entities in the astral world who are not reincarnating to earth again. They are going on, going up to an even higher plane of existence. At the right time, they will die very peacefully, very painlessly, to the astral world. They will, in fact, just vanish to the astral world, and they will appear in a higher plane. There are more and more people coming to the earth, more and more people being born to the earth, and many inquirers wonder, why should that be so? The answer is, Earth is just one speck of dust amid billions of specks of dust. And when people ask me why the population of the earth is increasing, I tell them the truth, which is that people are coming to earth from other more nebulous planes of existence. Perhaps a person comes from a two-dimensional world and comes to earth as his first experience in a three-dimensional world. So he starts his round of existence to the three-dimensional world, which we call Earth. And all of the time there are more and more people coming as Earth becomes more and more of a qualified school of hardship. That is the purpose of Earth, you know, to teach one hardship and how to endure it and how to overcome it. People do not come to Earth to have a very enjoyable time. They come to Earth so that all of the information they learn can be passed on to the Overself. After this world, there is the astral plane. And from the astral plane, in the fullness of time, one is born upwards to different planes of existence, until at last the fully evolved entity merges with the Overself. That is how the Overself grows. If, having grown quite a lot, the Overself decides that there is much more to learn, then fresh puppets are put down on some world, and the whole process of cycles of life is started all over again. And each time, when the puppets have completed their cycles, they return purified to the Overself, which again grows through it. When a person is living in the astral, that is, when a person has died to earth, then that particular entity enters into the full life of the astral world, and is not just a visitor, as are those who return to the astral world during that time when their body is asleep on the earth. And being full-time members of the astral world, they behave as ordinary people would on the earth. That is, at the end of an astral day, they sleep. The astral body, which of course is quite solid to people in the astral world, goes to sleep. And again, the psyche leaves the astral body at the end of its silver cord and goes into a yet higher plane. There it learns things which will be of use on what we might term the lower astral when the spirit returns to the astral body. Do not think that the astral world is the highest world. Do not think that it is heaven. It is not. There are many, many different cycles or planes of existence. While in that world, which we call the astral world, we can have a family. We live in much the same way as people live down here, except that there are not quarrels, because in the astral world you just cannot meet people with whom you are incompatible. So that if you get married in the astral, then you cannot have a nagging partner. This is not generally understood by people on earth. While in the astral world you cannot meet those who were your enemies on earth. And your family, well, your astral family are as solid to you as were people on the earth to you. Humans are not alone in the astral world. Animals go there too. Never, never make the most tragic mistake of thinking that humans are the highest form of existence. They are not. Humans are just another form of existence. Humans think in one way, animals think in another way. But there are entities who, compared to humans, are as much above the humans as the humans are above the earthworms. And even these people know that they are not the ultimate form of evolution. So forget all about being a superior creature and concentrate on doing the best job you can. Animals go to the astral plane. Animals go higher as they merit it, just as humans do. One of the big difficulties with the Christian religion is that they think humanity is the highest form of evolution possible. They think that all creatures were made for the satisfaction of man, and that has led to some terrible conditions. The animal world and the animal manus have been incredibly tolerant, knowing that humans have been misinstructed by their religious leaders, by their priests, who really rearranged Christianity to give themselves adequate power. Accept it as fact, then, that in the astral worlds you will not find cowering dogs or scared cats. You will instead find a partner who is in every way the equal of a human and who can communicate with a human with utter ease by telepathy. Many people have asked about bodies. Will a body appear to be just a bunch of gas or what? And the answer is no. A body will appear as solid to you in the astral as is that lump of me at which you now push about on two bony stems. And if two people should collide in the astral, well, they get a bump just the same as when two people collide on the earth plane. There is great love in the astral world. Physical love as well as spiritual love, but of course on a scale which the mind, limited to earth thoughts, cannot comprehend while in the earth body. There is no such thing as frustration in the astral world, because love is completely satisfactory at all times and for both partners. Some people have written in asking for a description of God. God is not just the head of a big corporation. You know, he's not just an old fellow who wears a long beard and carries a lantern on the end of a staff. God is a great force which can be comprehended and understood when one is out of the earth body and in the astral world. At present, upon the earth, one is in a three-dimensional world, and most people could not understand, let us say, the description of a nine-dimensional object. Each world has a Manu in charge of the world. You can say that the Manu is like one of the gods on Olympus, so thoroughly described in Greek legends. Or if you wanted to be more up to date, you could say that the Manu is like the general manager of the branch of a big firm. Under the general manager of that branch, because this world is only a branch after all, we have departmental managers who, in our terms, would be called the manus of different continents and of different countries. These under-managers are responsible for running, let us say, the USA or Germany or Argentina and so on. And just as human managers have different temperaments, so do the manus. And so the country concerned gets a different national characteristic. The Germans, for example, are quite different from the Italians, and the Italians are quite different from the Chinese. That's because the manager of that department happens to be different. The manus, no matter how glorious they seem to be, are just puppets of the great entity or overself which makes up God. That great overself uses manus as puppets in much the same way as the human overself may use a whole bunch of humans in order to gain experience. Another question which is so frequently asked is, the astral body apparently has some sort of substance to it. If it has molecules, no matter how thinly dispersed, these could be subject to destruction or injury through heat, cold, or collision. If this were so, some discomfort and pain in almost a physical sense could exist. How would the astral fare in the vicinity of a physical star? Well, when one talks of molecules, one is talking of substances which are in the earth plane. A molecule is a physical thing, a piece of matter. But when we're talking about the astral plane, we are completely away from the low-grade vibration which comprises everything upon this earth. A physical body on the earth can receive injury from another physical body, but a physical body in the astral cannot in any way be damaged by the physical body of the earth. The two things are completely and utterly different. One can say, just purely as an example, and not a very good example at that, one can say that a rock and a light do not interact upon each other. If we throw a rock up in the sky, it doesn't hurt the sun. And so in the same way, anything that happens on the earth does not hurt any astral body. But what does hurt people in the astral is the crass stupidity displayed by humans on the earth in trying to bump each other off. liquidate each other in various painful ways, and generally behave like a lot of completely insane people instead of entities who are upon Earth to learn something. The way people of Earth are going on at the present time is much the same as the way students who wreck million-dollar computers are going on. It's time humans grew up, and it's time students learned that they go to a school or a college to learn from people who know more than they do. End of chapter 8.